Hello, everyone out there in Radio Land. It is once again that time of the week. What time of the week is it? Oh, it's that time of the week where we dig underneath the headlines. We read between the lines, as it were. We get out our shovels and dig underneath the propaganda to bring you that real, straight truth. From the international, national, all the way down to the local level, it is that program that gives you that hype-poppin' leftist analysis that you will hear nowhere else. It is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, a weekly show where, among other things, we call out the establishment on its BS. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM, WIDR Kalamazoo, or Western Michigan University. So we got some stuff to talk about on the show, as we always do, of course. And I think we're actually going to start today talking about a national issue. I know usually I like to kind of start with the local stuff, but this is a particular story I've been following for some time. Really is making my blood boil, and I would sincerely like to talk about it. Later on the program, we've got some news from around the country, some good things, some bad things. Of course, something that hit the headlines recently, the fascists were on the march in Detroit outside of Pride. Quite disgraceful. We've got some news about kind of an update on a story we've been following for the past year and a half about the state of Michigan's new educational curriculum. Some general talk about how the City Commission is shaping up, including some new challengers, and we'll tell you who is going to be replacing Shannon Sykes for the duration of her tenure after she stepped down due to moving and finding a new place to live. But I believe before we get into all that, I wanted to talk about this particular story. Really touches me in a very personal way as somebody who's done solidarity work with local groups like Cosecha. If you haven't heard about this, and I'm actually, this is from an article at The Intercept. It is called Felony Trial of No More Deaths Volunteer Scott Warren Ends in Mistrial. It's by Ryan Devereaux. It was published June 12th, so that'd be earlier today. So it's it's not even necessarily good news. I'll kind of dive into it later, but I'm actually going to kind of read this article in reverse. I want to give you the context first before I tell you about the actual trial and what went down there. So the man on trial, it's this fella named Scott Warren, who was basically trying to help some immigrants who crossed the border through a particularly brutal part of the Arizona desert, as this article will go on to say. So here's what happened. Warren was arrested on January 17th, 2018 at a humanitarian aid facility in Ajo known as The Barn, some 40 miles above the border in one of the deadliest stretches of the Sonoran Desert for migrants making their way north. Owing to a Clinton-era border strategy known as prevention through deterrence, which intentionally funnels migrants into the most dangerous areas of the desert and remains the foundation of modern American border enforcement to this day. Yeah, but please keep in mind, while the Trump administration has been exceptionally cruel, our immigration policies have been pretty damn cruel for quite some time now. Excuse me. Back to it. A minimum of 3,000 people have died in the Arizona borderlands, though the true total is guaranteed to be higher. Just to explain what that means, they estimate of the bodies they've found, it's about 3,000 people have died in the Arizona borderlands. Of course, because these are remote stretches of the desert, it is difficult to get an accurate count because, hypothetically, there are a large number of bodies that they have not found and may not be found for quite some time. So, thousands and thousands of people have died trying to cross this particularly brutal desert so that they can get into the United States. In 2014, Warren began building bridges between humanitarian groups in southern Arizona, an effort to focus aid work, including the delivery of food and water and search and recovery operations in an area where the effects of prevention through deterrence have been particularly brutal. The so-called West Desert, also known as the Ajo Corridor. In the years that followed, these volunteers directly contributed to a historic increase in the number of human remains and bodies recovered in the region. On the morning of Warren's arrest, one of the groups Warren volunteers with, the faith-based organization No More Deaths, published a detailed report implicating the Border Patrol in the destruction of jugs containing thousands of gallons of water left for migrants crossing the desert over multiple years. The report included video evidence. Hours after it was published, a pair of plainclothes Border Patrol agents set up a surveillance post across from the barn. There they spotted Warren with two individuals they suspected were undocumented. Tonks at the barn, Agent Brendan Burns wrote in a group text, using Border Patrol slang for migrants. Some believe it refers to the sound a flashlight makes when it connects with a human skull. I think we talked a bit on the show before about kind of the abject cruelty inherent in a lot of these ICE and Border Patrol agents. I'd really like you to understand the totality of that, though. Not just the root of this slang here, but the fact that there are Border Patrol agents who are literally going around emptying out jugs of life-saving water. They are literally causing these migrants to die of thirst in the desert because apparently it's better for them to just drop dead than to, oh my gosh, cross America's sacred southern border and, oh, I don't know, get a job and be productive to society. Certainly far more productive than an ICE or Border Patrol agent, in my humble opinion, but goes on to say, the migrants Burns referred to were 23-year-old Christian Perez Villanueva of El Salvador and 20-year-old Jose Arnaldo Segaria Godet of Honduras. The pair had left their countries separately. By the way, both of those countries happen to be, ding, 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 countries that the United States government has economically or militarily interfered with. Honduras, a bit more recent, a little less than 10 years ago, under the Obama administration, supported the coup of a democratically elected left-leaning, I guess you'd kind of describe maybe as a social democrat, in favor of a far more draconian, right-wing conservative military regime that was much friendlier to U.S. business interests. So, again, just underscoring that, you know, these migrants, the people who come to our borders, who risk life and limb, are usually fleeing countries that have dissipated or come under chaos as the direct result of American imperialism. Of course, the Intercept is very astute at pointing that out, but I also want to make sure, as I tell my listeners these stories, y'all are able to connect these dots. Again, going on. The pair left their countries separately. Perez Villanueva hoped to seek asylum Sicaria Godet was homeless. And again, in the last 10 years in Honduras, housing, food, etc., a lot of the basic needs have been cut drastically. Crime has shot up in a very huge way. It's really not a surprise. They were strangers when they met in a Mexican border town. They became close and crossed the border together. They spent 2 nights in the desert where they were chased by immigration agents and tossed their backpacks and supplies, including their food. Again, back to the cruelty of ICE and the Border Patrol. Backed up by a caravan of law enforcement vehicles, the agents in the wash descended on the barge and placed Warren and 2 young men under arrest. The following month, Warren was indicted by a grand jury. While Warren was released on his own recognizance after a night in Border Patrol custody, Perez Villanueva and Sicaria Godet were not. The government detained the pair as material witnesses in its case for several weeks, then deported them once their depositions were taken. As The Intercept reported in a year-long investigation published in May, Warren's felony case was the culmination of an escalating law enforcement crackdown against humanitarian volunteers in southern Arizona that began shortly after President Donald Trump's inauguration. Warren was also one of 9 No More Deaths volunteers hit with federal misdemeanor littering charges in 2017 for leaving food, water, and other humanitarian aid supplies on the federal wildlife reserve outside Ajo, where migrants routinely die. The first trial in those cases, held in January, resulted in 4 No More Deaths volunteers convicted and sentenced to 15 months of probation and ordered to pay $250 in fines. A second group of volunteers facing misdemeanor charges accepted similar consequences days later, and the charges against them were formally dismissed. Warren's misdemeanor trial was held last month. Judge Collins has yet to issue a decision in that case. Now I'm going to go back up and talk a little bit about what actually happened in court. 2 weeks after the U.S. government began to argue its case in the prosecution of Scott Warren, a border-based humanitarian aid volunteer accused of 2 counts of felony harboring and 1 count of conspiracy, the jurors could not come to a unanimous decision as to whether he was innocent or guilty. The previous afternoon, the jurors had sent a letter to District Judge Rainier Collins informing him that they were deadlocked. Collins ordered them to go back and try again. By Tuesday, they were still stuck. 8 jurors believed Warren was innocent on all counts. 4 believed he was guilty. So if you need a little bit of hope, at least there is that. And an impartial jury, at least 2/3 of them will understand the heinousness of trying to try a human being for basically being decent to their fellow man. But not enough to help Scott Warren get in the clear, of course. The judge asked the jurors if they all believed that further deliberation would yield a unanimous decision. On that point, they were all in agreement. The jury was hung. I want to thank you for your time and your attention, Collins said, and with that, he dismissed the jurors. And one of the most important trials involving humanitarian aid on the U.S.-Mexico border in recent memory came to an end. 19 months after his arrests, Warren's case had drawn international attention and outrage, with the United Nations human rights experts and advocacy organizations from around the world decrying the prosecution as a blatant attack on humanitarian aid in a region where thousands of migrants have died and continue to die in the desert. Despite the mistrial, the government has not dropped the charges against Warren, a 36-year-old geographer from Ajo, Arizona. The possibility of a retrial is still alive, with Warren facing up to 20 years in prison if convicted on all counts and sentenced to consecutive terms. It really does boggle the mind when you really think about this stuff. There are children in ICE custody who have died because of lack of medical care. There are children in ICE custody who have been left in hot vans and cars for over 48 hours. There are people There are people in ICE and Border Patrol custody that have unnecessarily died of very basic medical needs. People come out suffering post-traumatic stress disorder. I wonder, what will be the sentence for the people who perpetrated those crimes? Those crimes of negligence, those crimes of abuse, those crimes of trauma. Is there ever going to be a, is there ever going to be a Nuremberg-style trial for those people? How long will those sentences be? 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, life? This man helps other human beings who were in dire need of water, food, shelter. Oh, but they were from across the border. 20 years in prison. 20 years. And what's even more disturbing about the Scott Warren case is that he's got comrades, particularly in the No More Deaths campaign, literally leaving life-saving water out in the desert, who are also facing long prison sentences for providing water to people who would otherwise die of thirst in the brutal Arizona desert. Where are our priorities? Yeah, that is a big effing question. All y'all out there. I will say, that is one of the things that makes me think, you know, we gotta train the next generation. We gotta do better, because this kind of abject cruelty that's been going on, not just since Trump, but has really been baked into the history of America. It's gotta stop. It has got to stop. Anyway, let's go on and read a little bit more. As they said, this defense attorney, Greg Kuykendall, went on to tell reporters on Tuesday, the government put on its best case with a full force of countless resources, and 12 jurors could not agree with that case. Scott Warren remains innocent as a legal and as a factual matter because the jury could not conclude otherwise, he added. We remain devoted today in our commitment to defend Scott's lifelong devotion to providing humanitarian aid. And it actually goes on to talk a little bit more about the No More Deaths arrests. Warren was also one of 9 No More Deaths volunteers hit with federal misdemeanor littering charges in 2017 for leaving food, water, and other humanitarian aid supplies on a federal wildlife reserve outside Ajo, where migrants routinely die. The first trial in those cases, held in January, resulted in 4 No More Deaths volunteers convicted and sentenced to 15 months of probation in order to pay $250 in fines. A second group of volunteers facing misdemeanor charges accepted similar consequences days later, and the charges against them were formally dismissed. Warren's misdemeanor trial was held last month. Judge Collins has yet to issue a decision in that case. Following the jury's dismissal Tuesday, Warren's friends and family filtered out into the hallway on the 5th floor of the courthouse, many unclear on what would happen next. Scott wanted to resume his life, Mark Warren, Scott's father, told The Intercept. This has been the focus of Scott's life for such a long time now, and it's all-encompassing. It's not like it's just something that's happening to me over here, it's everything. As Warren's family and supporters awaited new information, Kuykendall and his co-counsel Amy Knight were given the rare opportunity to speak with the jurors about the case at length. The defense attorneys told The Intercept they left the conversation with the impression that the deliberations in the case were serious, and the jurors' recaps of the process were specific. When Warren stepped out of the courthouse Tuesday afternoon, he was greeted by a throng of press, friends, and supporters. Standing before the cameras and microphones, he immediately addressed the issues that mattered to him the most. Since my arrest, In January 2018, at least 88 bodies were recovered from the Ajo corridor of the Arizona desert. We know that's a minimum number, and that many more are out there and have not been found, Warren told the crowd. The government's plan in the midst of this humanitarian crisis? Policies to target undocumented people, refugees, and their families. Prosecutions to criminalize humanitarian aid, kindness, and solidarity. As he wrapped up his brief remarks, Warren turned his focus to the people who had supported him and to the people who had been lost from his story. I've received enormous support from family, friends, lawyers, and my community. Thank you to everyone, and I want to say that I love you all very, very much. The other men that were arrested with me that day, Jose Sacario Godet and Christian Perez Villanueva, have not received the attention and outpouring of support that I have. I do not know how they are doing, but I hope desperately they are safe. So with that, I think we'll take a quick little break. We're going to play a little bit of music and then go into our good old PSAs and whatnot. Y'all listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Bush, and you're listening to 89.1 WIDR, Kalamazoo, Michigan, Kalamazoo. You know what you're listening to, Kalamazoo, Michigan, man. What are you, stupid?
Depression can take many forms. It can feel like static in your brain, or as if everything around you has lost meaning. It can debilitate even the strongest of people. 89.1 WIDR is here to tell you that there is help and a way to improve mental health. WMU offers counseling for all students in the greater Kalamazoo community at Synecu's Health Center. There is no need for an appointment for first-time visits. Open counseling times are Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Friday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. or Thursday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Synecu's is located at 1903 West Michigan Avenue, Kalamazoo. For more information, please call 269-387-3287 or visit www.wmich.edu/health center.
Welcome back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, the only source for political revolution. So, if you're just coming back, we're gonna flip it a little bit and talk about a local state issue, but that honestly ties into a much larger national and international issue. But I think this is good for, well, it's not good. It's not good at all. Let me try to explain that differently. I think this is effective at really explaining some of the concrete problems that the climate crisis not only will cause, but is already causing. And we're going to start with this story right here in the state of Michigan, and tie it together with something that's been going on in the Midwest that you might be tangentially aware of, but the sum total of will actually have a very profound effect on the country overall and the world. But it has to do with how the very chaotic and extreme weather created by the climate crisis is affecting crop growths here in Michigan and around the Midwest. So here's a story. This is from June 7th. It was by the Associated Press. Southwestern Michigan loses peach harvest after polar vortex. Experts say the polar vortex that enveloped much of the Midwest early this year nearly wiped out the peach crop in southwestern Michigan. Some of the region's apricot, plum, and apple crops may also be affected after a blast of polar air plummeted temperatures to minus 20 degrees in late January. Michigan State University's tree fruit specialist Bill Shane tells the South Bend Tribune that Michigan's southwestern counties will see millions of dollars of losses from damage to fruit crops. He says the polar vortex may have shortened the lifespan of trees that were severely damaged. Bill Teichman runs Tremendous Fruit Farm in Eau Claire. He says his peach trees won't produce fruit this year. He says some have deep cracks in their trunks, while others are bleeding sap. It's a very short story, but it gets really right to the point. And the tragedy of the matter is a farmer whose peach trees are dead. Some of them won't produce fruit at all until next year. Some of them are dead. Some of them have had their lifespan cut dramatically. Now, for large corporate farms, this might be a loss that you can take. But how much can you take when it keeps happening year after year after year? Let's make no mistake. What happened with the polar vortex was very extreme. Here in Kalamazoo, it got to nearly 40 below with the wind chill. And these are only happening more and more regularly. Now, I do recall growing up, I was a child throughout the 90s, so I'm 32 now. There were certainly some unusually cold winters. But nothing quite like the sort of flash deep freeze that we had last winter. And as we explained a few months ago during the polar vortex, this is related to the climate crisis because when the jet stream is weakened by the melting polar ice caps, the Arctic air does not get constrained in the Arctic Circle and in fact ends up going downward, in our case, into the American Midwest, including most of Michigan. All of Michigan, actually. So these are real tangible damages that are being incurred by the climate crisis right now by people right here where we live in Southwest Michigan. As we talked about on the show before, this is a part of the country that is actually going to be a lot more crop stable than many other parts of the country as the climate crisis continues. And even then, we are still very much at the mercy of these extreme weather events that, again, are going to become more and more and more common as the century goes on. And of course, that's even if, by some miracle of miracles, the human race gets its proverbial crap together and does what is necessary to prevent extinction via climate change. We are still going to see a lot of baked-in crisis, a lot of baked-in problems, such as these, that will be completely unavoidable. Now let's take that one story from one very specific region in our state and let's extrapolate it a little bit. Let's talk about what's going on in the rest of the country. This actually got shared to me by a former co-host of ours, Luke McDonald. If you're listening, shout out to you, my dear friend. And it was kind of trying to extrapolate the actual concrete effects of a lot of the extreme weather we've been seeing in the Midwest. If y'all remember, there's been massive, unprecedented flooding in places like Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, as well as major tornadic activity. And I'm actually going to go ahead and read right from this thread. I usually reserve that for actual news articles, but I think the analysis here is really on point, and I would just like to present it to y'all for some very bitter food for thought. As it says, this is Jeffrey Ryman. Because this has become a very popular thread on Facebook. Originally posted by a D&D group, actually. But anyway. Much of the Midwest, which is landlocked with no major natural bodies of water except our rivers, is underwater. And most of the food grown in the U.S. won't be grown this year. High water rescues are being performed in what is supposed to be prairie. Flooding shows no sign of stopping and is going to break the all-time flooding record. Levees are topped and failing, retention pools are full, and on top of that, major tornadoes, over 750 so far, on 4 occasions reaching EF4 status, have been happening. Over 400 streets are closed in Missouri alone, and most of the major interstate, I-29, is closed in Iowa, Missouri, and Nebraska. Most farmers in these areas don't have flood insurance because they're not in floodplains and normally would never need it. So they are at a major loss. The U.S. grows about 70% of the entire country's staple crops, and half of Canada's too. The U.S. is Canada's main place of import because there is more viable planting space in the U.S. than Canada. $1.4 billion of exports are sent to Australia every year as well, mostly pork, milk, and fruits that can't grow in Asia, which is Australia's main supplier. Now, I'm going to read this next section, and I want you to really work through the implications of this. This is big. There will not be corn, soy, dry beans, canned beans, beef, chicken, or wheat grown. Beef will go up at least $2 a pound, and corn and soy will be extremely pricey and hard to find because it will have to be imported. Lots of farmers haven't even been able to plant their fields and cannot plant at all, most commonly as a result of too much moisture in the soil. Though driving through my part of Illinois, I can tell you that many fields are more puddle/lake than actual field. Most of this area with lots of rain has already hit their final planting date, when crop insurance no longer guarantees a full payout, as crops planted after that date stand a significantly higher risk of not making it to harvest. So before I read on, I want to just break this down real quick. The staple crops of not just the U.S. economy, let's put the economy aside here. I hate how often these things get boiled down into dollars and cents. This is about our food supply. Corn, soy, dry beans, canned beans, beef, chicken, wheat are unable to grow in much of the most fertile parts of the farm belt because they have been flooded by these biblical rainstorms that again are becoming more and more and more common. You don't need to even really travel too far to understand this. Right here in Kalamazoo, we have seen extreme flooding in places where 10 years ago, 15 years ago, never used to flood. Of course, that has much more profound effects when you are the breadbasket of the continent, as many of these places are. And then you have these farmers who are not only out of an entire planting season, but will be unable to support themselves because, again, our capitalist system isn't built for crisis of this magnitude. Like that crop insurance, of course it doesn't cover full payout of these crops after a certain date, because in many of these regions, there is no conception of a kind of crisis or disaster that would occur that would prevent early planting on time. There is no way that our current capitalist structure can deal with the crisis 10, 20 years in the future. It can't even deal with it now. And as the song goes, we ain't seen nothing yet. Anyway, let me continue to make you depressed with these truths and facts. As a result, many farmers are looking at having to take prevented planting payments, which are generally 50 to 60% of their normal revenue. Additionally, taking these payments prevent those farmers from being able to replant their crop. While some haven't paid for inputs, feed, seed, fertilizer, many already have, and it will be extremely difficult to cover these losses with such a low payment. It is going to be a massive hit to small and medium-sized farms, which constitute over 90% of farms in the United States. Livestock is also dying at an alarming rate. One person I know has recently lost 200 cattle because of flooding. More levees have breached in this, and the flooding is worse than Katrina. More rain is still coming. Fields that should be planted right now are sitting under feet of standing water, which is also a breeding ground for mosquitoes and other disease-carrying insects. Right now, we are leaning on a back supply of food. It's going to only last for so long. If you live somewhere that is affected by this, and you very well might, even if you don't know it, stock up on food. Corn, soy, wheat, beef, and dry beans are the biggest thing that will be affected. Chicken might be good to stock up on too. Prices will skyrocket when back supply begins to run low. This is a very real thing. Nuts, potatoes, and pea-based proteins won't be affected. And there's some photos on this particular thread that, again, are really pretty scary to look at. And really reveal the scale of the kind of flooding that they're talking about in these areas that, again, never used to flood. There's a comment under here that says Illinois is like 45% planted. It's astounding and scary. As in 45% of the available farmland that is usually planted is planted. Less than half. And, that last bit of advice in the article, it sounds alarmist, but it's true. Give me just a second. Sorry, I'm playing solo today, so my throat's a little scratchy from having to talk so much. But so one of the takeaways that I really want to hit home for people from this. Actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and take a quick little break. When we come back, we'll finish talking about this, and then we'll move on to another article. Y'all are listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo.
Interested in underground hip-hop. Here is a complete disc jockey show with all the modern pace of today's exciting radio.
Listen here on
Saturday night
from 7 to 10.
You can't go wrong. There's one important element missing, however. That's you.
Hip-hop epic show.
Saturday night.
You know what I mean? DJs bring me young, play that real live shit. The hip-hop epic show.
I know.
Yo, I'm talking about the Hip Hop Epic Show. The DJ bringing young.
Transmitting live Saturday night. WIDR Kalamazoo.
Keep bouncing.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing technical difficulties. Please stand by.
Can't get enough Radio Evolution? Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook to find updates on all things wider, including upcoming shows and events, exclusive interviews, and ticket giveaways to your favorite live music venues in Kalamazoo.
Freak out, yo.
When you're not smashing that like button, be sure to keep it tuned to 89.1.
Yo.
We are back. If you're just joining us, we were just talking about how extreme weather is affecting crop yields. Here in Southwest Michigan, especially when it comes to peaches, plums, and other assorted things, and then affecting many of the staple crops of the American diet, including corn, soy, wheat, beef, and dry beans. So what I really wanted to express with this, in a weird way, it's kind of a silver lining to this. It might be this. One of the main problems I feel when we talk about the climate crisis is that to many people, even those of us on the left who understand it on an intellectual level, it's just so abstract. You're talking about this existential problem that it's not even like nuclear war. We're talking like a big bang and a flash that could potentially end life on Earth. They're talking about something very slow, something incremental that is built up and is basically the collective chickens of late-stage capitalism and industrialization coming home to roost. And it's a difficult subject because, again, you don't feel a whole sense of urgency about it. During the Cold War, people were constantly fearful about the bomb dropping. They would have drills. They would hide under their desks, duck and cover, which again, not very effective. But it was always this background anxiety. Now, climate change, too, is a background anxiety, but it's more difficult because we're talking about the consequences of our actions on our own ecosystem. Nobody pushed a button to make climate change happen. It was a series of decisions made over the last century and a half. Now, granted, by a handful of very wealthy individuals, primarily. But they shaped the kind of civilization we lived in that while the decisions to live the way that we live were made by people far more powerful than us, we all participate in that system. As much as we disdain it, it's extremely unavoidable. I myself, I'm a vegetarian. I don't drive a car, but still, I occasionally have to buy products, soaps, shampoo, the basic necessities of life, and I only make about $11.20 an hour, so I can't even buy a lot of the more expensive, eco-friendly products, which again are largely owned by the same corporations that make the mass-produced versions of them. So either way, you're still giving your money to a corporation that is wrecking the planet. Now, what's the silver lining to this that I mentioned earlier? Well, this is going to be something that will make the climate crisis tangible to everyone. Doesn't matter if you're the most staunch denier. Doesn't matter if you're some centrist liberal who thinks incremental change is the solution. Everybody is going to feel the climate crisis when you go to the store and hamburger is $7 a pound, or corn, soy, wheat prices shoot up at your local supermarkets. Now, granted, that's not going to mean much to the rich. It won't. It's going to mean a hell of a lot to the working class, and it's not really going to matter where your politics lie. Whether you're a radical communist or someone wearing a Make America Great Again hat, you're both going to be paying far more money for the basic necessities of life. Everyone's going to feel it in their pockets. Now, granted, there have been a lot of disasters that have been deflected before. It's easy for people in the Midwest to not think too much about the wildfires in California. It's not too much for people in the South to not really understand the polar vortex. Or maybe they could be one of those people who think, well, it's cold, the global warming. It's easy to be somebody in the North and not think too much about how massive hurricanes have been wrecking huge swaths of the Southeast. But when food prices go up all over the continent drastically, well, that might be something that is just enough to make everybody stand up and pay attention and think, this didn't happen 5 years ago. This didn't happen 10 years ago. This didn't happen 20 years ago. For those of us who believe in climate change, who understand that it is very real and very scary, it'll solidify our resolve. For those who maybe deny it, it might prove to be the wake-up call that they need. Because again, it's very different when this is just an abstract political issue that gets debated about by talking heads on Fox News or MSNBC. It's very different when it's an issue that is hitting you in your pocketbook and making it that much harder to keep food on the table for yourself and your family. Of course, anyways, that's the hope. Anyway, I think what we're going to do now, we'll take our hourly break early. When we get back, we've got some more news to talk about, some stuff out of Detroit and Michigan State. And then we'll come back here to Kalamazoo and talk about some developments in local politics. Y'all are listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
And you're listening to WIDR Kalamazoo. Some say smell your feet, they stink, you never take a bath. Your nose it runs, you bust your buns, you always finish last.
Is your RSO looking for new ways to get its name out to Western's campus and the greater Kalamazoo community? Why not use the wider airwaves? For more information on how we can work together to promote your organization and events, go to widrfm.org and click on the Airtime and Sponsorship page under the Support tab.
Hello, everyone out there in Radio Land. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So let's go do some little good news, bad news dealy here. And let's start with the good news. So here's the good news. This kind of puts the cap on a story we've been following for the last year and a half or so. It was when there was a proposition for some curriculum changes to the Michigan education system that were a bit backwards, to say the least. Pinned by that paragon of leftism, Patrick Colbeck. By the way, super sarcasm. He was the most right-leaning candidate of all the gubernatorial candidates. Engages a lot of Islamophobic scaremongering. But he led the way in trying to adopt this extremely backwards, reactionary education curriculum for the state of Michigan, which, among other things, minimized the civil rights movements, excised references to Roe v. Wade and the gay rights movements from its pages, removed use of the word democratic or democracy because, and get this, they thought people would equate it with the quote-unquote Democratic Party. Oh, God. And take out a lot of information there about Native and Indigenous struggles. So here's where we are finally at here. This is from Michigan NPR by Steve Carmody. It's published June 11th. The Michigan Board of Education approved controversial new social studies curriculum standards Tuesday. It's the first update since 2007, but it has not been an easy path. Educators and liberals slammed one proposal that included extensive input from conservative groups. The proposal approved by the board was slammed in turn by conservatives who claim it's too biased to the left. It's shameful that elected officials would even consider this type of anti-American agenda, former Troy Mayor Janice Daniels chastised the board before crying a bunch of stupid right-wing tears. Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's not actually what it says in the article. Anyway, conservative critics contended the standards contained inaccuracies and anti-Christian bias. Oh, Lord. So this relates back to their whole victimhood complex, like your equality, or your progression towards not having to deal with as much systemic injustice as you used to. Your equality is my oppression because I am no longer superior to you. That's kind of like how the thinking goes. As it goes on to say, supporters dispute that assessment. Erica Sponsler is a high school social studies teacher in Jackson County. She likes the final document. We know they are not perfect, nothing is perfect, but we appreciate most is the process that went into this. After the vote, several critics said they would be pulling their children out of Michigan's public schools. Oh, boo-hoo. Well, actually, boo-hoo for the children, because they're probably going to be getting some kind of wacky hyper-Christian education that really is not much good for learning about the rest of the world and how the world actually works. I will go back and say one of the greatest gifts I think I ever had was growing up not only in a diverse neighborhood, but a diverse high school, because gosh, I met so many white people after high school that had no idea how other kinds of people worked. If you just like the cognitive dissonance of coming to a racially and culturally and ethnically diverse area was much a shock to their system, where a lot of their implicit bias and grown-worthy white people isms were not necessarily the direct result of racism, but just profound ignorance, because they'd been living in these little white bottle cities for such a long time. Not to ramble too much, I recall being asked when I was a student here at Western Michigan University. I was at a table with a bunch of folk, all white, and this is like over at the Bernard Center cafeteria. And one of them asked me, "Hey, Andy, you're from the hood. What are black people like?" And at the time, I was, of course, very sardonic. I think I said, "Oh, well, you know, they all hop on pogo sticks. What kind of question is that?" But to be honest, yeah, a lot of it made me realize, man, a lot of these white people have literally never seen a non-white person before. Again, that's why integration is important. That's why diverse schools, not only diverse schools and curriculum are important, but diverse schools themselves. You need to interact with people outside your bubble, folks. Anyway, after the vote, one group left the Tuesday's Board of Education meeting happy. Michigan's Sikh community made an organized effort to make several amendments to the curriculum. They were upset that their religion and its historical significance was not represented in the social studies document. The board approved the amendments the Sikhs sought before approving the final package. Oftentimes, history is taught from one perspective, and there's traditionally been an exclusion of different perspectives, said Dr. Amandeep Gruwal. Sorry. It is time to correct that. And just a refresher, this is from June 9th. The new proposal reinstates much of what the previous proposal would have dropped, including, what I just mentioned, including references to climate change and democratic values. A general again, like, you know, it's funny to hear these reactionaries call, like, basic centrist middle of the road history, mad leftism. Look, if we were to actually have a left-leaning history in Michigan schools, they'd be like, oh, by the way, America was actually built on the backs of enslaved black people and the corpses of indigenous folks. But of course, you know, as it stands, the current curriculum is still going to teach the kids that line about, oh, America was started on principles of freedom and inclusion. Ho, ho, ho. So again, we've got a centrist version of American history in there with a few addendums for various ethnic and racial groups, which is a good thing. But let's not kid ourselves. It's not like this curriculum is challenging capitalism or the status quo in any kind of tangible form. It's just that the right wingers aren't getting the hyper reactionary Handmaid's Tale of history that they wanted taught in our schools, and of course they have to go throw a hissy fit about that. So not really so much a win for the left, but if you want to get your wine glass and drink some conservative tears, please be my guest. Of course, while the right-wingers and reactionaries lost in their plans to tell a bunch of fake news to our youngins, they did get a bit of a victory in an unfortunate place, in an unexpected place, to be honest, over in Detroit. A lot of y'all may have heard about this. I wanted to give y'all an update in here. This is that story about the Nazis who ended up being able to march towards the Detroit Pride. Now, as the days passed since Pride, we were able to learn a few more details about this incident and a little bit more about the context. I want to read from, this is an article from the Detroit Metro Times. Headline is, Chief Craig defends decision not to warn public about neo-Nazis' violent plans for Detroit, by Steve Nealing. And, you know what? I'm going to save my voice a little bit. There is an audio version of this article. I'm going to go ahead and play that. Actually, never mind. It won't. The audio version won't play, so I'll just go ahead and read it. Ahem. Detroit police were aware for at least a week that armed neo-Nazis plan to disrupt a Pride festival downtown over the weekend and incite violence worse than what went down in Charlottesville, Virginia. Despite the potential for bloodshed, the Detroit Police Department failed to warn the public or city council that a hate group was targeting the LGBTQ plus community. A week or so ago, we received intelligence information that a hate group was going to come and disrupt the festival and that individuals would be armed. Police Chief James Craig told City Council on Tuesday. They didn't just want to do what they did in Charlottesville, they wanted an enhanced version of Charlottesville. The neo-Nazis, who are members of the National Socialist Movement, which is, by the way, not actually socialist, will explain to the right-wingers if they ask. Anyway, marched with riot shields and at least two rifles and 3 handguns. Their plan, according to Craig, was to taunt and incite festival goers at Motor City Pride. I wasn't aware of it until I saw it blasted on social media, Councilman Andre Spivey told Craig. The chief argued that notifying the public could have escalated the risks of violence. He added, "We don't want to create unnecessary fear." Festival goer Shannon Burke said she would not have risked going downtown had she known about the neo-Nazis' plan to target Motor City Pride. "It's unfathomable to me that the city didn't bother warning the public," she told Metro Times. "Would the police warn us of a potential terrorist attack? This is no different. I'm appalled." Craig applauded his officers' handling of the march and fired back at critics who claimed police were quote-unquote escorting neo-Nazis. But they were. There's video footage. That is what they were literally doing, is escorting the neo-Nazis. Let's not, twist hairs about this or whatever. That is what the police literally did. They escorted the neo-Nazi group past a crowd of people who came out to protest said neo-Nazis. The chief explained that the officers created a roving buffer. Or in other words, the chief is creating fake buzzwords to cover for the fact that his police were literally escorting neo-Nazis past the Pride Detroit. So, my first concern was for the safety of everyone. Craig said, "No one was hurt. Our strategy worked." Okay. Anyway. Asked whether the chief notified Mayor Mike Dugan about the neo-Nazis before the march, the office responded that the mayor has faith in the chief to make the right decisions. So again, deferment of responsibility by the mayor. We're going to go on further. Say, also during Tuesday's meeting, council members dispelled rumors that they approved a permit for the neo-Nazis to march. "I don't think anyone at this table would have approved them coming," Councilman Roy McAllister Jr. said. Some members of the public fired back at the chief for claiming for a second day that counter-protesters, many of whom were African-American, hurled racist epithets at black officers. Craig also said both sides were wrong and insisted Antifa, an anti-fascist... Oh my God. There were fine people on both sides. Again, this is... no. I will say the chief didn't say this explicitly, but he is equating the efforts of anti-fascist protesters to fight off Nazis with Nazis. Again, that should make anybody hearing this seething with rage, because again, whether you approve of the tactics of Antifa or not, which again, this makes it sound like it's like a centralized organization. Antifa or Black Bloc is a tactic. Anti-fascism can mean a whole lot of things, but most generally it means if you are against fascism. And Antifa, as it's kind of been shorthanded, refers to groups that meet anti-fascist groups to counter-demonstrate. And yes, sometimes that means a clash of fists or objects. Honestly, if, our whole thing, this happened actually on the 2 days after the 70th odd anniversary of D-Day, and there were Nazis openly marching through the streets of Detroit. And the cops are patting themselves on the back that they kept these anti-fascists from creating more violence, i.e., beating up Nazis. Oh my God. I'm sorry. That is just... let's broaden out the context here. In other countries, this is not how stuff like this plays out. Granted, open fascists have been demonstrating illegally in greater numbers in places like Germany and Eastern Europe, but for the longest time, they had certain limits to free speech, i.e., your speech is not free if you are a fascist. If you are a fascist, your speech will be paid for by prison time or egregious fines. And honestly, that all goes back to the tolerance paradox. In order to have a tolerant society, you cannot tolerate intolerance. Otherwise, they will use that against you to build their movements. By allowing Nazis to march through our streets, it allows them some sense of legitimacy that they can use to recruit. To the credit of the Lansing police, they more or less let the main incursions happen. Now, a lot of fascists and anti-fascists were arrested after the fact, but, you know, as they say in Godzilla, let them fight. Yeah. And, again, I don't like the way this article paints Antifa, or even, one of the protesters actually said, none of that is true. Counter-protester Miko Williams told the Metro Times, we were there to protect the festival goers, and only told black police officers that the white Nazis will kill you too. And, yeah, let me really cap it off with just some of my own thoughts. This, you know, I knew people who were there, and they again outraged from, you know, some firsthand accounts. The Nazis Nazis shoved and hit some folks I knew. Nazis weren't able to get hit back, largely because of the protection of the officers. This is not how we deal with Nazis, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentle them as well. This is not how we deal with Nazis. Especially the police department failing to warn. And again, their whole thing is, you know, when they talk about they didn't want it to become another Charlottesville, I think what they really meant is they didn't want a large contingent of counter-protesters to chase them out. Because as we have seen, especially since Charlottesville, when these Nazi groups threaten to come out to these things, there's usually hundreds and hundreds of counter-protesters come out of the mix to challenge them, which is definitely what would have happened had this gotten out. The police, what they're really saying is they didn't want to have to deal with a bunch of Nazis getting beaten up by counter-protesters. And, you know, realistically, some of these fascists holding rifles could have ended up getting bloody, but what did the police do? They protected the Nazis and let them march and be on their merry way. And again, failed to warn people that this group that was marching would like to see dead. It means something a whole lot different when there's a huge difference between some right-winger Trump MAGA hat wearing dude, or, you know, even like some Patriot Prayer or Threeper marching around. They have different ethics. These are straight up Nazis, not diet Nazis, not Proud Boys, Nazis with a capital Nazi. They came there to say, hey, if it weren't for these police, we would be firing into the crowd. We would want you dead. We want you dead. That is the Nazis' goal. They want LGBTQ plus people to be dead. This was hugely mishandled by the Detroit police. And next time, y'all need to warn the people so the people can protect themselves, and also so the people can tell the Nazi punks to F off. So with that, let's go to another news story. I wanted to read this. This was shared to me by our dear friend Nora. And it's some good news coming out of the New York area. Excuse me. So this is from a New Republic article. I'm going to bounce back to some good news. It's a historic breakthrough for sex workers' rights. And this was published on June 9th, 2019. Excuse me. And it was written by Melissa Jura Grants. Back in February, advocates for sex workers' rights in New York announced their intention to fully decriminalize prostitution in the state. No one really suspected then that within 2 weeks, Democratic candidates for president would be pledging support for competing legislative visions of what they called, at times incorrectly, sex work decriminalization. Quite suddenly, the enlightened thing to do, or at least to say you were doing, was to support these measures, a development that came as a shock even to many sex workers who had long campaigned for decriminalization. On Monday, the same group of advocates, Decrim.NY, will see a bill they helped draft introduced into the state legislature that promises to give practical shape to the goals sex workers have pursued for several decades. The bill is groundbreaking for the United States. If passed, it would make New York the first state to fully decriminalize sex work. The New Republic has had its first look at the bill. The measure removes criminal penalties associated with adults selling and buying sex and repeals parts of the law that has criminalized sex workers' places of business along with loitering for prostitution in public. Their aim is grounded not just in criminal justice reform, but in more fundamental appeals to economic justice. This is not just about decriminalizing workers or the absence of criminal codes. It's about making sure people who work in the sex trades have access to making a living in the sex industry in a way that is not a crime, said Audacia Ray, a member of the Decrim.NY Steering Committee, a director at the New York City Anti-Violence Project, and a former sex worker. The bill would also strike prohibitions on promoting prostitution, which can be used to criminalize any group of sex workers who work together, whether that is in the same workplace or remotely by helping each other advertise or screen potential clients. Which, again, I would say one of the big harmful impacts. We've talked about SESTA, FOSTA on the show, but one of its adverse effects is it really impacted the ability of sex workers to screen their clients by taking down things like back pages, etc., and caused them a lot more risk. Induced them to have to go in blind a lot more often with these clients, or in a worst case scenario, have to go back to the bad old days where they were where they have to resort to being under an abusive pimp. So, going on to say, compelling prostitution and promotion of prostitution involving cases of forced intimidation or minors would remain a crime. The things that actually protect people, it keeps those on the books, said Jared Trujillo, a member of Decrim.NY Steering Committee, the president of Legal Aid Society's labor union, and a former sex worker. As far as trafficking, you still can't traffic people. As far as being able to purchase sex from someone who's underage, all those protections for minors are still on the books. This same bill also contains a critical provision permitting people with prior records for offenses decriminalized by the bill to have those convictions vacated. Altogether, for adults engaged in the sex trade, Trujillo said, what it does decriminalize is really just existing. The New York bill is the most comprehensive sex work decriminalization measure in the country, though it is not alone. In Washington, D.C., a revised decriminalization bill was introduced last week with the backing of 4 district council members. These bills are now landing in the early phase of the 2020 campaign, the first in which multiple major candidates are, when asked, offering their proposals on changing laws against sex work. Sex workers, not politicians, should lead the way in crafting sex work policy, former Senator Mike Gravel tweeted. In a Data for Progress and Decrim.NY poll released in May, Democratic voters said they support fully decriminalizing sex work by a 3-to-1 margin. For For the first time in the 40-year history of the American sex workers' rights movement, a state legislature may finally heed those demands. Even after a quick scan of the 20-plus page draft bill, it's clear that decriminalizing sex work means dealing with more than just laws against prostitution per se. It actually means speaking to exactly how pervasive the criminalization of the sex industry is, said State Senator Julia Salazar, that it touches so many parts of the law the average person doesn't think about when they think about prostitution being illegal. Salazar, a Democrat, is the Senate sponsor introducing the bill alongside Assemblymember Richard Gottfried, who put in critical work drafting and researching, according to Decrim.NY. They are joined by Senator Jessica Ramos and Assembly members Catalina Cruz, Ron Kim, Yo and Dan Quart. In addition to removing penalties for selling and buying sexual services, just one part of full decriminalization, the Decrim.NY bill also strikes prohibitions on keeping a house or place of assignation for lewd persons. That ban gave landlords free rein to evict sex workers for their places of work or residence, or both, or in other cases to decline to rent to sex workers at all. If you were to focus only on decriminalizing the sale of sex and no longer prosecuting or charging sex workers, Salazar explained, but you continue to impose fines or penalties on landlords in places where sex is exchanged or on the johns, first of all, it eliminates potentially a safe space for the sex worker to work and puts them in further precarious situation economically or physically, not having a safe place to be. And potentially it can lead to them losing housing and landlords retaliating against them. Though these may be understood as unintended consequences of anti-sex work laws, she said, they are really harmful and must be addressed. In the context of global criminal justice reform, to roll back these discriminatory laws in order to protect the rights of sex workers is not a new approach. New Zealand decriminalized sex work in 2003 and has since become the model for full decriminalization, now backed by many human rights groups and NGOs such as Amnesty International and the World Health Organization. Like New Zealand's decriminalization effort, New York's is led by sex workers themselves. But it is adapted for the American system, which remains one of the most punitive anti-sex work regimes in the world. In New York City, around 1,500 people were arrested on prostitution-related charges in 2018. These arrests target mostly sex workers of color, transgender sex workers, and immigrant sex workers. Police don't only arrest people for the work they do or think they are doing, but for carrying on with their daily lives, like walking to the subway or wearing leggings, both of which the NYPD have considered violations of law against loitering for the purposes of prostitution. Ending such arrests, said Trujillo, will make immediate improvement for sex workers. If you look in Manhattan and parts of East Harlem where they've largely stopped arresting people for loitering, their lives have gotten better and there's been fewer instances of police interactions. Defunding vice policing is also an opportunity to invest in services that improve sex workers' lives, he said. It can demonstrate to lawmakers and to prosecutors that services for sex workers need not be tied to arrests. Some in law enforcement defend arrests as an intervention meant to help sex workers, but the reality, Trujillo said, is that an arrest is traumatic in and of itself. As a criminal defense attorney, he recalled what the experience was like for his clients. You meet them for the first time when they are in a cage, and you are asking them to tell you in the 5 minutes before you arraign someone, you are asking them to tell you about something that's deeply personal to a lot of folks. And then you have to go into a courtroom in front of a judge in a courtroom full of people, hear their sins or misdeeds. And it's dehumanizing, it's humiliating for a lot of people. It's really inhumane. While it may seem minor in comparison, striking laughably dated language like lewd persons from the criminal code, said Ray, is another way of rolling back stigma against sex workers, attitudes that lead people to accept abusive policing. Take an archaic New York statute permitting police to seize from alleged bawdy houses furniture, fixtures, musical instruments, and movable property used in conducting or maintaining such nuisance. If that sounds like a law drawn up by a player piano paper, it very may well have been. These are laws that regard not just places, but people as a nuisance. Not all of New York's anti-sex work laws are so antiquarian. The loitering for prostitution law went only into effect in 1977. A separate standalone bill to repeal it was introduced in the state legislature in February and has since passed out of the Codes Committee in the Assembly. Last week, the NYPD announced they would amend their patrol guide regarding enforcement of the loitering law, instructing officers to not arrest people based on gender identity, clothing, location, or past arrests. Part of a settlement between the police and plaintiffs in a 2016 lawsuit charging that a loitering law violated their constitutional rights. Momentum against the loitering law could potentially help push this comprehensive decriminalization bill onto the agenda. Advocates don't expect a vote on the measure this session, but they note that the rapid movement towards full decriminalization is unprecedented. What's behind the sudden push? I believe it is necessary for these two new women elected officials to make this kind of statement, said Cecilia Gentili, a steering committee of the Decrim NY and former sex worker. Gentili was referring to Senators Ramos and Salazar, who arrived in the state legislature in Albany as part of a wave of left-leaning lawmakers who won election last November. That new blood infuses the Senate, she added. A Latinx person like Jessica giving this bill shape is what makes it unprecedented. Decriminalization has been centered as a meaningful, thoughtful idea, but is centered by young women of color in power, Grinnell observed. We're absolutely the base of the Democratic Party. And these are the people you want to listen to and not degrade. She considers these new women lawmakers emblematic of the broader leftward direction of the party, as well as a significant break from the past prohibition-driven approach to sex work. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and take a little break. Once we come back, we've got some local stories to talk about involving the Kalamazoo City Commission. Y'all are listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Be apparent, but hunger is a rather prominent issue amongst the student body of Western. The Invisible Need Project is a multifaceted initiative that's aimed to help struggling students. Every 2 weeks, generous people donate their food to the pantry located in the Fawn Student Service buildings or other drop-off locations. All you need to do is grab a reusable bag and grab whatever food you need to help sustain yourself. If anyone's unsure when their next meal will be, or if you have a little extra food you'd be willing to donate, the food pantry is your place. If you're looking to help donate, become a volunteer, or just learn more, call 269-387-4742 or email dosa-inp@wmich.edu for details.
Hello, this is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So, let's go ahead and talk a few stories about the City Commission. So, a big congratulations to Patrese Griffin. She will be the new interim City Commissioner, filling Shannon Sykes' vacated spots. And just a little bit about her. I've worked with Patrese before. She's a really dope advocate for the not only housing, she's also helped a lot of initiatives over in the North Side neighborhood. And she's been on several city boards, really like down there, getting into the nuts and bolts of how to provide housing for people in the city. She also is going to be running to keep this seat in November. So I think what I wanted to go ahead and do, I want to go ahead and play, this is a clip from the City Commission meeting on June 10th. And I want to just kind of play back. This is the current board plus the mayor basically interviewing her and asking questions. So I thought it would be best to kind of show these were her responses, and this is the person who is going to be our city commissioner, at least until the November election and perhaps beyond that. So let's go ahead and play that clip for y'all.
Thank you for your willingness to step up and serve. We know that you could be doing anything else other than being here tonight, but you have honored your community by your willingness to step up and serve in this vacancy. We appreciate that very much. I believe you understand the criteria for tonight or have been given instructions. So you know you have a 2-minute opening and the floor is yours.
Okay. My name is Patrese Griffin. I am a mother of 3, 2 in KPS, the wife of a community organizer and activist and an artist who was raised on the east side of Kalamazoo and currently proudly calls the north side of Kalamazoo home. As soon as I found out that my voice and actions mattered and could affect the lives of others, I haven't looked back. As a citizen, I have turned tragedy into triumphs and used personal experiences to drive my passion for making sure everyone who visits and resides in the city of Kalamazoo has a positive experience. I believe in equity. I believe in justice. I believe in action. I believe that we can improve the conditions of this community, such as health, wealth, education, childcare, employment, and transportation, as well as our environment. I believe in this community, and I believe that people like myself help make a difference in this city. I have met the same challenges that many of our community residents have faced and face daily. My life and my family's life have been affected by the criminal justice system, and we have been in housing crisis, and we've had to navigate the systems. I have made difficult and very uncomfortable decisions throughout that process that have affected my lives, the lives of my family. I am this community. I speak for those who can't speak for themselves. I speak for those who rarely get heard, and I speak for those who don't even know they have a voice. Thank you, and I look forward to serving this city on a different platform.
Thank you. Commissioner Urban will have your first question.
Hi, Patrese.
Hello.
Well, in your opinion, what are the biggest issues facing the city of Kalamazoo that the City Commission should be working on to address? What would you like to see the city of Kalamazoo and the Kalamazoo metropolitan area be in 20 years?
So to answer your first question, I'm going to say housing. It is the foundation and the basis of which everyone's lives are able to either thrive or not. And if we get that under control by means of breaking down the barriers that people have to getting into housing, it's not just about building new homes, it's about making sure that people can get into the homes that are already in existence as well as the ones that will be built in the future. Where I see the city in 2020 is thriving, more equitable, more positive experience for all those involved as we move through the plans that have been set in Imagine Kalamazoo 2025.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Yes. What is the city's overall budget for 2019 and what is the general fund budget?
$181 million for the overall budget, and the general fund budget, I believe, is $64 million.
Commissioner Anderson.
How do you plan to involve residents in decision-making processes in our city?
Hopefully, first of all, I can be an example. I am a citizen of this community. I did not come here by way of an employer or through an organization necessarily. As I said in my opening statement, I found out that just exercising your voice, showing up in spaces, having a plan makes a difference. And so I hope that all residents of the community will be able to see me as an example. What happens after this is up to you, but to this point, hopefully they will all see that this is what can happen, and effective change can be made by making your voice heard.
Commissioner Kuhn.
Patrese, what strategy should the city follow to end or alleviate intergenerational poverty?
So I'm going to go with targeted universalism, and if anybody's not familiar with that, the universal idea would be to end poverty, but there's targets you have to hit in that. For example, the poverty, the issues that the Black community may be different than the issues that the Latinx community, the Latina community faces, and so it's important that if you're going to reach this target, that you deal with the populations that are underneath that umbrella so that you can achieve that goal of decreasing or eliminating intergenerational poverty.
Commissioner Cunningham.
What point of view will you bring to the City Commission that will help ensure that our decisions are wise and balanced?
Well, the point of view that I will be bringing is the lived experience. That's that gap that can't be filled by data.
Commissioner Anderson.
A little bit of a longer one here.
Okay.
What was your participation in the Imagine Kalamazoo 2025 process, and what is your understanding of the IK 2025 strategic goals for the city? Do you support these goals? And if so, how will you work to move forward the community's vision?
Well, I was not part of the original process of the Imagine Kalamazoo 2025. I am, and I have been part of the process via Shared Prosperity Kalamazoo. As I am a member of that organizing committee, the work that I do in my life involves creating more equitable society. And so different policies, procedures, practices, things of that nature. And I need you to repeat the last question because I forgot.
It was more specifically about the goals of IK 25.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like the shared prosperity, good governance, things like that. Those 10 goals are 10 and then 1 for the city with the good governance. Yes, I'm in support of all of those. I am in support of those mostly because of the voices that were heard to create that plan. If it didn't come up from the residents of the city, my answer may be different. But because it was driven by the city, the members of the city and the community, I'm in support of that.
Commissioner Cunningham.
Thank you, Mayor. What is the primary purpose of the Kalamazoo Foundation for Excellence? What are some of the ways the Foundation for Excellence supports that purpose as specified in its founding and organizational documents?
Well, the purpose of it was to help stabilize the budget in Kalamazoo City by reducing the property taxes. It supports the goals of the city of Kalamazoo, funds the aspirational projects such as Shared Prosperity Kalamazoo, and overall just empowering the city residents.
And the final question is Vice Mayor Knott's question.
Thank you. So as you may be aware, Kalamazoo passed a non-discrimination ordinance in 2009 prohibiting discrimination against the LGBTQ community. The first part is, do you support that ordinance? And then secondly, the Human Rights Campaign issues an annual municipal index score that looks at municipal laws, policies, services, etc. For people that live and work in a particular community, LGBTQ people. Our current score is 74 out of 100. What would you propose as a commissioner to do to improve our score before the next report is published in the fall of 2019?
So the first question is yes. The second question is a Human Rights Commission, because even though our score was higher than 2017, where we were about in the 60 range, we got a lot of bonus points for having members of our commission be openly LGBT, but where we didn't get any points was on a Human Rights Commission, and that is something that I would love to see happen. That is something that I advocate for, having a Human Rights Commission in this community, and so yes.
Do we have any follow-up questions for this candidate related to the answers that she gave? Well, thank you. Thank you. You have 90 seconds for a closing.
Well, I will make this short and sweet. I just honestly want to thank you, Mayor Hopewell, Vice Mayor Knott, Commissioner Urban, Commissioner Cunningham, Commissioner Knott, Commissioner Cooney, and Commissioner Anderson for giving this citizen the opportunity to stand before you in hopes of sitting next to you to help lead this city. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate you stepping forward, as I said before, and we hope to fill this tonight.
So, again, that was Patrese Griffin being questioned by the current city commission, and she will now be city commissioner. Now, while we're on the topic of city commission, I wanted to go through, there were some big candidate announcements since the last episode. I want to first talk about Mr. Jake Andrews has announced his campaign for city commission. I'm going to play a little video from his Facebook page. This is his announcement. And then talk a little bit about what he's got on his website. So
folks and all the folks outside of this.
My name is Jacob Andrews, and I'm a proud resident of the great city of Kalamazoo, and that's why I'm so excited to announce my candidacy for the Kalamazoo City Commission. Growing up in a working class home, I understand what too many families are struggling with here in Kalamazoo, needing to make the difficult decisions between paying your bills and feeding your family. As a recent graduate of Western Michigan University, I know this city can and needs to do more to support people in this community that want to continue their education, whether it's college, universities, or trade schools. And growing up in a biracial home, while I've personally benefited from my fair share of privilege, I've witnessed firsthand the dangerous effects that institutional racism and personal bias can have. I'm running for the Kalamazoo City Commission because I believe this city needs a voice for my generation, and that we need fresh, innovative ideas to help support our young people and our families. I'm running because I believe local government is only effective when inclusivity is valued and sought after intentionally. And I'm running for Kalamazoo City Commission because I believe that every solution we are looking for is already within our own community. We need commissioners who value our community activists, our nonprofit leaders, and all the experts we're so fortunate enough to have. But this campaign, this movement, is only possible with your help. So please share this video, like my page, and check out my website at jacobcandrews.com to get involved. I look forward to meeting new people and working together with this community to help create a Kalamazoo we can all be proud of.
So again, that was Jacob Andrews, or Jake Andrews. Some of you might know him. He recently became the chair of the Democratic Party over the last year and a half or so. His some of the platform pieces he has up on his websites. He says top 3 priorities: fight for equal representation. Talking about basically changing the way our city commissioners are currently elected to be a council by district system. So instead of it being the current at-large system we have, city commissioners would be elected from the specific districts and neighborhoods in which they live. Something I'm personally a big supporter of myself. Affordable housing. He goes on to talk about prioritizing affordable housing. I'll read directly from his page. He talks about how the median income for an individual in Kazoo is around $22,000, but the average rent is around $900 a month. So currently people are spending around half of their income on housing. And then he also says criminal justice reform, goes on to say if Kalamazoo wants to ensure a prosperous and equitable community, the community needs to trust its public safety. After 2013 study determined Kalamazoo officers profiled drivers based on their race, I believe the city has made many strides to improve. About 4 years after, the Kalamazoo community deserves to know if the efforts have made a difference. Additionally, I look forward to amplifying the voices and fighting alongside activists addressing many of the unfair policies and city ordinances that target marginalized communities. Gonna cap off tonight's episode talking one last candidate who recently announced, Pete Kushner. He goes on to say kind of what his platform was. He says, my goal as city commissioner is to implement the city of Kalamazoo's master plan by proactively supporting an all-inclusive government through neighborhood engagement and input, energetically implementing our complete street policies, and connecting our citizens to services. It goes on to talk about his success as a neighborhood association president and his time as a neighborhood leader. So again, you want to find out more about him, check out Pete Kushner for commissioner.com, and then you can find out more about Jacob at jacobandrews.com. And again, we're hoping to have both of them on the show in the fall as we do go and interview all of the city commission and mayoral candidates. So let's go ahead and close out our show with excuse me, with a little hitch up with the activist calendar, let you know what's going on in the community over the next week. So, coming up tomorrow at the First United Methodist Church of Kalamazoo from 5 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Got Healing Through Exploring Local History of Racism and Segregation. Again, that's going to be from 5 p.m. to 8:30. And there's going to be presentations from Dr. Michelle Johnson, Matt Smith, Patrese Griffin, and it's going to have a lot of facilitators from Isaac and the Kalamazoo Community Foundation. So again, that is going to be at the First United Methodist Church from 5 to 8:30 p.m. Also, Cal Salon is hosting a teach-in/discussion patriarchal power grab. It's about a lot of the recent anti-abortion and anti-women's rights laws that have been sweeping the nation. That's going to be from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. over at Central City Tap House. On Friday, June 14th, there's going to be a Stand Against Racism public policy briefing over at the YWCA Kalamazoo. That's going to be from 12 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. On Saturday, June 15th, over at the Bernard Center, Fatherless, A Story About Truth and Healing. That's going to be over at the Bernard Center from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. From 1 p.m. to 4 p.m., over at the Kalamazoo Valley Museum, there's going to be the Juneteenth Celebration of Freedom. Also from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m., the Urban Alliance Summer Block Party is going on. That's going to be over on Stockbridge. Chaos, which is the goth night over at Papa Pete's before their main program. I'm sorry. I think actually that's going to be next week. But anyway, also going on Monday night, community-driven storytelling event, the Kalamazoo Nonprofit Advocacy Coalition, going to be putting that on the KNAC. That's going to be 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. And then, that looks like about it. Very busy week, though. All y'all social justice warriors out there. So, I want to thank y'all for tuning in. Again, we post up all of our episodes on YouTube after the fact, and you can follow us at the Hoodrat Strategist radio program on our Facebook page to keep updated as soon as those episodes drop online. Until next time, I want to thank y'all for tuning in. This has been the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. Until next time, keep on fighting for that revolution solution.